All right, are we ready for a third one? This is the third and last one in the series. We're going to talk about Jerusalem in the modern history of Jerusalem, basically, for the last 2,000 years. And it's kind of amazing. Just the last 2,000 years, that's the modern history, but that's the way it is. The Romans come here in 130 AD and they crush the Bar Kokhba rebellion. What was in Jerusalem between 70 AD until 130 AD? We have no idea, because the Romans crushed everything. There are theories that they even rebuilt the temple during that time. We don't know. In 130 AD, the Romans crushed Jerusalem once and for all, for good, they thought, and forced everyone out. Jews were not permitted to live there anymore, and on the ruins of Jerusalem, they built Ilia Capitolina, a new pagan city that they built on top. And just to really smear it in, they built pagan temples on exactly where the Jewish temple was, and they also built a pagan temple on Golgotha, which Christians had already started to revere as the place where, as the sepulcher and the grave and Golgotha, where Jesus was crucified and resurrected. And this went on for a few centuries until the Roman Empire became Christian. Now, what happened then? Now, I'm going to put aside my Bible, because this is all post-biblical history. We don't need the Bible for this part. Now, when the Romans became Christian, one of the first things they did when Jerusalem was to switch back the name to Jerusalem. But besides that, they didn't make that much changes. Yes, the Temple Mount, they ruined, of course, the whatever kind of pagan temple was on the Temple Mount. Yes, that was gone. But they kept it in ruins. They wanted it to sort of stay at, well, Jesus said that this place would be ruined. Stone will not be put on stone, so we're going to leave it like that. And it stayed like that for centuries. About Golgotha, of course, they ruined the pagan temple and built the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is there till this day. It has, of course, had a lot of additions since, but it's been there ever since. Besides that, what did the Christians do? Did they allow Jews to come back in and live here again? Nope. They just kept the Roman idea that, no, Jews are not allowed to live in Ilia Capitolia. They changed it to Jerusalem. Jews are not allowed. Why are Jews not allowed in their own capital, which has always been the capital since the time of King David? Well, they need to know that we won. They need to know that they're not. It's this whole replacement theology idea that God is done with Israel and that the Christian church is the new Israel. Those kind of fake ideas that has no basis in the Bible had already taken root by the time the Roman Empire became Christian in the 4th century. So that just stayed around. And this city was a Christian Byzantine city with Golgotha as the center, the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, with the Temple Mount basically, not really important, stayed in ruins. And this was the situation until the Muslim conquest in the 7th century. Now, although that's not entirely true, because there is a short period of time in the early 600s when the Persians ruled here. So let's get a little bit back to that. In the early 600s, early 7th century, the Persian Empire and the Byzantine Empire are having war after war after war against one another. Byzantines are Christians. The Persian Empire is Zoroastrian. They have a duotheism. They believe in one bad and one evil and one good God who are fighting between one another. Not polytheism and not monotheism, but duotheism, Zoroastrianism. Look it up, it's pretty interesting. Anyway, the Persians and the Byzantines are fighting over and over and over, and at one point the Persians conquer Jerusalem, and then the question is, okay, what do we do? And the Jews in the Persian Empire convince the emperor, let us rebuild the temple. Let this be a Jewish capital once again. It actually starts to happen. They build a Jewish synagogue on the on the mountain. They have a Jewish sacrifice for the first time in many centuries. But an angry Christian mob basically ruin everything. Now there are stories from both sides: angry Jewish mobs killing a lot of Christians, angry Christian mobs killing a lot of Jews. Both sides are talking about horrible things being done. They are both probably correct. Eventually, the Byzantine conquer the whole area back, but it doesn't last for very long, because the constant fights between the Byzantines and the Persians have made both of them so weak that once Islam starts to grow in the Arabian Peninsula, not the Byzantines and not the Persians can stand against them. And before long, the Persian Empire, the new Muslim Empire has conquered most of the Middle East. They reach all the way to Spain. no one can stand against them. And according to the story, the first Muslim conqueror saw Jerusalem from here, from the south. It came from this side. I don't know if that's true. Now, according to the tradition, now you see the golden dome here. That's the Dome of the Rock. That was built over where Abraham sacrificed Isaac. Now, they say that this is where Abraham sacrificed Ishmael. That's their version of the story. And according to tradition, according to a story that I heard, I cannot say if it's true, there was a Jewish Muslim together with these conquerors. And from their perspective, especially from the Jewish Muslim, but for many Jews, it was finally Jews are allowed to live in Jerusalem again for the first time in centuries. And not only that, the Temple Mount is not in ruins anymore. They are rebuilding it's not actually a Jewish temple. No, they're rebuilding a third temple, but it's a mosque because the Jews are no longer the people. God has instead revealed himself to Muhammad. We need to follow the new rules that God gave Muhammad. This is the Muslim way of seeing things. They built the Dome of the Rock, and then they built the Al-Aqsa Mosque. Now, where should they build the mosque? North of the dome? South of the dome? The Jew says, hey, why don't you build the Al-Aqsa Mosque north of the dome? That way, when people are bowing down towards Mecca, they're also bowing down towards Jerusalem at the same time. That's perfect. But the Muslim conqueror says, nope, I'm going to build the Al-Aqsa Mosque on the southern tip of the Temple Mount. Why? So that everyone who are turning to Mecca to pray, they will turn their back to Mount Moriah to prove that Jerusalem is no longer the center, that the Jews are a past thing, that we are now Muslims, we are now pointing to Mecca. And that's been the situation till today. The area, the very southern wall, you see the little dome right there, that's the Al-Aqsa Mosque. That's the third holiest place in Islam, where according to tradition Muhammad went to heaven. And that is actually where all of the prayers are being done. And when they turn to Mecca, to the south, they actually turn their back to the Golden Dome. Another interesting thing about the Dome of the Rock, it has 8 sides. Why does it have 8 sides? Because all of the architects in the area were Christians, and the Christians would always build all of their things with 8 sides. Why? Because of the 8 blessed are those who from the Sermon of the Mount. So the Dome of the Rock actually has a part of the Sermon on the Mount in it, in a way, by being 8-sided. But anyway, this has been the Muslims has pretty much been holding on to the Temple Mount ever since, except for when the Crusaders came. And that's the next phase, really, that's coming. The Muslims rule this area, but they are leaders. They are the foreigners. The locals, most of the locals are still Jews and Christians in this area. The entire area becoming mostly Muslim, that only happened in medieval times, around the 13th, 14th century, actually after the Crusaders came. When the Crusaders came here, they found a mixed population here of Jews, Christians, Muslims, and a lot of Byzantine Christians. Now, of course, the Crusaders, they didn't have much. They thought of the Byzantine Christians as heretics as well, and they built their own. And this is the first time actually that a different church comes here, because the Byzantine Empire, when they ruled here, it was all the Byzantine church, which we now call Greek Orthodox. When the Crusaders came here, they started for the first time to build Catholic churches. And they, of course, have their own way of building, of additions to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. So we have all of these things going on as well. They came in the year 1099, and they lost Jerusalem because of Salah al-Din, I think maybe about a century later, if I'm not mistaken. Salah al-Din, or Saladin as you call him in English, was able to eventually unify the Muslims around. He conquers Jerusalem, and the only Crusader area that is left is a small piece in the north next to Akko. Richard Lionheart comes and tries to conquer Jerusalem back and fails. And Saladin actually tells Richard Lionheart, hey, you want to come and see Jerusalem at least? And Lionheart is like, if I can't conquer it, I don't want to see it. So Richard Lionheart was never actually here. He ruled from Akko. After the Salah al-Din conquers the area, it becomes Muslim again. But then the Mamluks come, and the Mamluks rule from Ramle. It's during the Mamluk rule, more or less, that more and more of the locals become Muslims. Now, exactly as in most other Muslim countries, Jerusalem is not a capital, it's not a center. They actually build the city of Ramle, which becomes the Mamluk center. This is, we're talking 13, 14 until the 1500s or so. Mamluks are not Arabs, they are a slave, mostly Mongols probably. They are slaves that became Muslims, that were ruled by Muslims, that became rulers and took over. Eventually, and Jerusalem sort of becomes more of a spiritual center at this time. They start to build all kinds of madrasas and teaching places and mosques, and they allow Jews to live here and have their own synagogues. They allow churches. But and eventually the Ottoman Empire in the 1500s conquer them. Now, from the Crusaders until the Ottoman Empire, Jerusalem doesn't even have any walls. It was ruined by the Crusaders. The Crusaders built something up. It's ruined again by Salah al-Din. He doesn't want to rebuild any kind of walls. And also during the Mamluks, they're like, we don't want any walls. What if the Crusaders come back and then they will have walls, you know? When the Ottomans come, one of the things that the Sultan Suleiman does is he builds the walls, and those are the walls that are still standing today. They were built in the 1500s. According to tradition, there were two builders who were building around until they met one another. And then he became mad because they left some part out that he wanted in and had them both executed. I don't know if that's true. If you go into the Jaffa Gate of Jerusalem today, you can still see the grave of those two builders to the left. And that's a pretty fancy grave. So that tradition seems to be, it doesn't ring quite true, because you wouldn't give such a fancy grave to those people. Nevertheless, that's the building of those walls, and within those walls of the Ottoman Jerusalem, that was all that Jerusalem was until the 1860s. Only after the 1850s, 60s, they start to build areas outside of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem starts to grow exponentially, both during the late 1800s and later after 1917 at the British Mandate, and during Israeli independence after 1948. Now, at Israeli independence, 1948, Jerusalem becomes divided. There's a war of independence, and all of the old city becomes Jordanian. And the border actually goes pretty much where I'm standing. Where I'm standing right now used to be UN buffer zone, no man's land, between Jordan and Jerusalem. And only in 1967, Israel conquers the rest of Jerusalem, and Jerusalem is finally unified as one united city in the state of Israel again. And that's the first time that the Jews are ruling the Temple Mount since 132 AD.